It's interesting. We started 2 services today for the first time, and I mentioned last week that you would have to adjust to potentially being in a new seat. And what I failed to realize is that I also have to adjust too, because I'm looking around and I'm like, you're not supposed to be there. You're supposed to be acting in the corner, and you're supposed to be over there. So if I'm staring at you and you're looking at me like, why I'm staring at you, it's because I was staring at the person who sat there before you. That's why. Okay. We're kicking off a new series, which I am very excited about. It's called Confident People in an Anxious World, because we live in a world that, let's face it, you could find something to be anxious about at any point. You could be justifiably uneasy the rest of your life, and nobody would think twice, because you could right now pick out your news feed and just scroll down, and there's something somehow that it could affect you in a way that would cause you to be worried. At any given moment, nobody would blame you for being a person who went through life worried, but I don't think that's what God has for us. I think he wants us to be confident people in an anxious world. So let's pray, ask him to teach us, and we'll move on. God, thank you so much for what Eric read from Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus gave us instructions about how we can live in a world that's just filled with lots of reasons to be anxious. Father, I pray that we would see the truth from that text, that it would change our lives, that we'd live confidently for you. In your son's name we pray. Amen. I remember I was about 10 years old, and my parents had taken me up to some land in Potter County. So we went up Route 6. We had this nice 5-hour-long drive. And we'd spend the week in my grandpa's and my pop-pop's trailer, camping in the woods. And we just had so many great memories that whenever we went home, we would always take a souvenir with us. I don't know if you're a souvenir person or not. I was like crazy. Whenever we went somewhere, there had to be a stick or a rock or a leaf, something that would be a reminder of the time that you got to take home, some little treasure. And then I had the treasure drawer. It would all go in when I got home. And I remember on one particular trip, we found the souvenir of all souvenirs. It wasn't just a rock. It wasn't a stick. We found a porcupine quill. And I remember begging my parents, will you let us keep this? Can this be the souvenir? Can we take this home? And for some reason, my parents agreed to it. So I went home, and it went into the souvenir drawer. And it stayed there for some time. I'm not sure exactly, a couple months, until one morning when I went to grab something out of the drawer, and it was jammed. And you know how when a drawer jams, it'll come like halfway out? And you've got to reach inside the drawer to free up the jam. You see where this is going, right? And so I reached in, and I felt something sting, and I pulled out my hand with a porcupine quill sticking right out of my ring finger. And I remember at that point being freaked out, right, as any 10-year-old would, but no big deal. My mom's a nurse, so I went downstairs, and I showed my mom, and my mom goes downstairs to the basement to where the tools are, and she comes back up with needle-nose pliers. At this point, I'm thinking this might be Mom's first experience with a porcupine quill. I don't know. And so I sit down, and she starts to try to rip the porcupine quill out. And it's at that point that we learned a lesson that many of you already know, that porcupine quills have barbs to them. And so you can't just rip it out because it just continues to stay embedded. And so we're pulling it, and we're pulling it, and we're pulling it. And I'm at the point where I'm about to pass out, and I'm queasy at that stuff anyway. And I just remember begging my mom to stop, and she was like, well, if I don't do it, you're just going to go to the doctor's office, and he's going to give you a bunch of shots, and then he'll take it out. I'm like, well, this is a lose-lose situation here. Well, she calls my grandpa. My grandpa comes over. My grandpa, and if you're like my age and you had a grandparent that was involved in your life, your grandparents typically carried around newspaper clippings, right? And that was like newspaper clippings. Whatever they needed to remember, it went in their wallet. So I remember my grandpa pulling out his wallet, looking at the porcupine quill, pulls out his wallet, and he unfolds something about how to get porcupine quills out of your hand. I'm just like, are you kidding me? How did you happen to have that article stashed in there? If you're like 20 or younger, think of a wallet with newspaper clippings. That was Google back in the day. That's how people found out stuff. You carried it in your wallet. And it said that if you put vinegar and baking soda in a solution and you soak the porcupine quill, I'm not making this up, soak the porcupine quill in there for about 10 minutes, the barb dissolves, and you can pull it out. And so about 10 minutes later, yanked it right out. I'll tell you what, though. One thing is for sure, I have never since reached into a drawer the same way. I'm always a little bit more hesitant. I'm always a little bit iffy, like, hey, what's in there? Is there a porcupine quill? Is there some living creature in there? I'm worried about something that might be in there because my history has created a tendency. Now, I look at what God has called us to be as people who follow after him with a degree of confidence and certainty as we trust him in life. But what I realize is that many of us, myself included, have developed tendencies from our history that change the way we interact in relationships, where maybe we're not confident and open and trusting and loving, and instead we're reserved. I call it like turtle shell living. Like we just tuck back into our shell and don't really allow ourselves the opportunity to get to know other people and be vulnerable around them. And so what I think God has for us is this desire to retrain our tendencies. That maybe historically something has happened to you that has caused you to respond in a way that is different than what God desires you to. And I think he wants us to walk down a new path, where we look at him, we look at who he is, and we see in a world filled with the potential that anything could go wrong at any point, but I can still be retrained to follow after him with confidence because of who he is and what he offers us. So we're going to be looking at that this morning. I need to give a little disclaimer. Throughout this series, we're going to be talking a lot about our relationships, interpersonal relationships, and what we'll say will be true, I'm hoping, I'm intending, will be true for 99% of our relationships. There's always that 1% of the relationships that are just so toxic that we can't really address them right here, right now. And my fear is you might take what we're talking about this morning and apply it to that. That's an individual conversation, and I'd love to be able to meet with you, pray with you, talk about that. But apply this to the 99%, about what it means to trust people in a world where people are not very trustworthy. What it means to be vulnerable in a place where we may have gotten burned before. Much of this series is obviously going to be founded on Scripture, but a lot of it is influenced by a guy who writes a book. His name's Steve Cuss, and he writes a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. I've referenced it a couple times lately. It's a great book if you're a reader, just really looking at the idea of how can you lead people while you wrestle with the anxiety that's inherent to leadership. But specifically, there's truth that really makes its way into all of our lives and what we wrestle with. And this is what he says about anxiety overall. He says, anxiety is a signal, not a root cause. It is a siren that the storm might be coming. It is not the storm itself. Getting to the root cause is key to transformation and systemic health. In other words, the anxiety, the physical response that we have to what might go wrong, that's the siren. But there's usually there's always some sort of root underneath that has caused the siren to go off. And what we're going to do throughout this series is look at those things that are the root causes, the things that sound the alarm. And the hope is that through what God teaches us, that we can move away from broken cycles and towards effective solutions. And we say, God, I'm afraid of what might happen if I trust somebody. They might expose me. They might take advantage of me. They might embarrass me. But God, if you call me to this, then I'm going to follow after you and see what you have for me in life. The reality is, I think everyone would agree that it's hard to actually trust people. And I mean like trust, like, hey, I'll tell you my day was okay, or, I had a car breakdown. I mean, like, it's hard to actually trust them. To say I'm really struggling here. Or to say this is worrying me. To really be trusting is difficult. And I ask the question, why is that so hard? Why is it so hard for me to trust people? All right, it's a given that we struggle to trust people, but why? See, I think history has taught us that we've learned someone somehow will do something to frustrate us or to annoy us or to embarrass us, and as a result, we tend to do whatever we can to avoid situations where we have to trust somebody and rely on them for something else. Now think about your responses when trust is broken in your life. What are the things you say at that point? I was thinking about this, and I've got some of these statements. Should have seen it coming. Never should have trusted them in the first place. Should have known better. It just would have been easier if I never trusted anyone at all. Now, here's the thing. We say those things, but why do we say them? Well, we cringe at trusting, but why do we cringe at trusting? As I thought through this, as I prayed through this, I thought about my own life. And to me, it all came down to one central truth of why I struggle to trust other people. And it's this: I don't trust people because at the end of the day, I struggle to trust God. I don't trust people because I struggle to trust God. If I really think about it, I'm fearing that he's not enough to be sufficient for me when somebody else lets me down. My faith isn't strong enough to think that God can pick me up when I've been vulnerable and been hurt by somebody else. And so what I'll do is I'll avoid any sort of situation that would put me into a place where that might be true. So I don't have to make the statement, I should have known better. You know why it's really hard? It's so hard to trust people because it exposes the fact that I'm actually not in control. Right? I feel like if you sit on sermons here a lot, like that concept comes up a lot, and that's because it is true a lot, that we really, really like to be in control. We like to know what's going to happen. We like to know how it's going to happen. We like to know when it's going to happen. We like to know why it's going to happen. But at the end of the day, we also recognize that we don't really know everything we want to know, and we can't control everything we want to control. And so there's this tension where we just pretend like we're in control until we're not, and then we get upset about it. So we'll do whatever we can to avoid it in the first place. You know what? This is an illustration I use a lot when I talk about control. It so reminds me of taking youth groups on whitewater rafting trips, where I feel great going down a river in a boat that only I'm in. But if you put 5 teenagers in the boat who are holding the paddle upside down and are facing the wrong direction, I'm going for a swim. And I know it. I know there's some time when 4 or 5 of them aren't going to be paying attention. They're going to be texting each other or whatever they're doing. And the boat's going to run into a rock, and I'm going to be the one who falls out. And so I'm hesitant to get into the boat in the first place because I know I'm entering a situation in which I might be vulnerable. And what I become aware of is that other people are unknown variables in my control system. And I just don't know what they're going to do. And so I'll keep it safe, and I'll keep my distance, and I'll not really engage with them in a way that they might embarrass me or in a way that they might hurt me. And so I'll give little opportunity, and I'll remain safe, but I'll avoid. Here's the thing. If we're going to be confident people in an anxious world, you need to understand that this is huge. Do not mistake confidence for avoidance. Do not mistake confidence for avoidance. Simply because you avoid every scenario that might infringe upon what your control is, that does not make you a confident person in life. It doesn't mean that you're able to wisely navigate life. And so, look, we have too many marriages that settle for a shallow relationship because we're afraid of what would happen if we're really open and reliant. And we have too many friendships that stay surfacey, not because we're confident, but because we avoid. So let's look at control and understand that your control of a situation is not a good thing. Like you feeling completely confident that you've got life figured out is not something that the scriptures are like, awesome, great, you've arrived at spiritual maturity, you can go to heaven, you've got it figured out, you're totally in control. No, what God does again and again is he invites us to trust him. That's what Matthew 6 is, Jesus saying, hey, the world's going to break down. Not sure if you figured it out, but the world is prone to breaking down. Don't worry. Don't worry. See, here's the thing about control. You lose it because you lost it. You lose it because you lost it. We lose control of ourselves because we lost control of the situation. And so as I think about that for my life, every time that I get angry, it's really because I lost control of the situation. Every time that I yell or I blame or I bring shame, it's because I felt vulnerable or I felt afraid. I lose control because I lost control. Now, if we're going to be confident in an anxious world, we cannot try to find confidence in that which is itself anxious. If we're going to be confident in an anxious world, we cannot try to find confidence in that which is in itself anxious. In other words, my control is anxious because I know at any given moment it could give in or give out. And if my confidence is in what I can control, that is anxious. And I have no confidence in life. And what Jesus does in Matthew 6, which Eric read earlier, is he invites us to more in life. He invites us not to find confidence in that which is anxious, but in that which is constant. That in an untrustworthy world where thieves break in and steal, where moths destroy, where things age, where economies fail, where things just don't happen the way we want, Jesus goes, hey, despite all that, don't worry. Trust in God. Don't worry. Well, how can he say that? It's easy just to say that. I remember when we first got married, whenever my wife would be upset about something, I'd fix it by saying, relax. And I realized before too long, actually it took me about 3 years, sadly, to learn that. I realized that doesn't fix it, right? And actually she doesn't want to be fixed, but that's another sermon for another day. I realized that really just saying relax doesn't fix it. But what Jesus says is he says, don't worry, and then he takes us to the fact that we don't have to worry because there's a Father who's so remarkably trustworthy that in an untrustworthy world we can have confidence. That I don't have to worry because there's somebody who is in control. That while there's lots of variables in this world that I don't know how other people are going to act, there's one that remains constant. And so in Hebrews 13, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In Malachi 3:6, he says, I, the Lord, do not change. No coworker has ever said that to you, right? If they did, they were lying. James 1:17, with God there is no variation. No child has been ever to say that to their parents. So we don't find our confidence in them. We don't find our confidence in others because they are fluctuating. But God himself is consistent, remarkably consistent. And he invites us to be consistent and confident in him as a result so that I can be loving when others wrong me. That I can be respectful when others are disrespectful. That I can be loyal when others are disloyal. See, God, what he does is he offers us the hope to say, if you attach your confidence in life to my ability to be there for you at any moment, then you're free from all the worry of the things that your confidence would, if it was attached to everything else, would alter it. And so he's offering us so much more that our response to broken trust in life shouldn't be anxious, it should be confident because I've got a God whose love compels me to love others even in their failures. So Matthew 18, Jesus is teaching about forgiveness. And he tells a parable about a wandering sheep and how he's got a heart to pursue it and run after it at all costs so that it can be restored to him. And then he turns his attention to talking about the church and how the church operates. And he says, hey, if there's a person who is in sin and running away from God, this is how the church can do what I just talked about to seek after and restore somebody to a right relationship with God. And then the close audience of his, the disciples, the key followers, they're standing around and they're starting to think like, okay, so that's how you work. That's how the church should work. And then the natural thought in their mind is, well, what about how should I work? Like if you've got such a heart for mercy, such a heart to keep running after people and trusting yourself to them, how does it work for me? And so Peter comes up to Jesus in Matthew 18. It says, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times. Now, Peter at that point is probably being generous. In their society, he would have been okay by saying, hey, Jesus, like, what do you think, like 2 times? But he probably wanted to look good and not look bad in front of Jesus. And so he was like, how about Jesus, I was thinking 7 times. What do you think, like 7? Is that good? Because in his mind, that would be just so incredibly generous to forgive somebody 7 times. And Jesus is going to respond with something which is really amazing. This is a statement. Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. That Peter, you may have thought you were being generous, but you're not even close. Not 7, but 77. What is Jesus saying? Are we literally supposed to keep a little check mark sheet where, Connor's messed up 65 times and sorry, buddy, you only got 12 more? Is that how this works, or is it kind of, do we budge a little bit, maybe 78 for somebody we really like? How does this work? Well, 77 times what Jesus is doing, he's actually communicating a principle that started all the way back in the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 4. where his audience would have known that. As the second Jesus said 77 times, they would have compared what Jesus was saying with the story of Lamech in Genesis 4. So what's the story of Lamech in Genesis 4? Well, let's start here. If you read Genesis 4, you're going to read a broken, messed up family tree. And the reason you're going to read a broken, messed up family tree is because Genesis 1, God's creating. Genesis 2, this perfect humanity. Genesis 3, it starts to fall apart. And a virus called sin has begun to corrupt. Genesis 4, it's all over. It's spread throughout. Where love has turned and been distorted into lust. Where generosity has turned to greed. Where anger has turned to murder. And you've got the story, brief story of a man named Lamech. And Lamech has a vengeance that's off the charts. And look at what he says. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Now, when you see things like this in the Bible, God's not condoning that. He's recording it. There's a difference between when we read these stories in the Old Testament and they're just like this person married this many people and they had this many kids and they all fight. And God's not saying that's what we should do. He's recording it so we can see how it broke down. This is the breakdown of what happens when anger takes hold of our lives. Where Lamech says, if you think Cain was something, where Cain killed his brother and he got revenge and he avenged himself 7 times over, if you think Cain was something, you haven't met Lamech. I am going to make people say, I'm going to have a reputation. And he boasts at his ability to be vengeful, not just to say that my vengeance will be thorough and complete, but my vengeance will be extravagant. I'll be known for my vengeance. Peter says, Jesus, 7 times? Jesus says, no, Peter, 77. Why? Because I don't want you to have some mercy. I want you to have extravagant mercy. 77 times trust. So put yourself out there again and again and again, because your mercy is not just thorough, it's not just complete, it's extravagant. That we be a bunch of little anti-Lamechs running around, forgiving each other like crazy. Just absolutely excited about the idea of taking mercy and showing it to somebody else. I mean, just like prepared. Like if we go back to the rafting trip, like, hey, I'm ready to get knocked out of this boat. And I'm ready to love whichever teen swung a paddle over their head and hit me and knocked me in. I'm ready. Because I'm extravagantly merciful, because that's what Jesus teaches. So here's what he does. Jesus answers Peter once, and he's going to answer him a second time. And Jesus transitions into this parable just to make sure that Peter doesn't just see the quantity of how much mercy and forgiveness and trust we should extend, but that he would also see the source and the origin for what he's called us to do, because he knows how extremely difficult that's going to be for us. So Jesus tells a parable. Parable is about a king who decided it was time to settle accounts. So he calls anybody who owed him money, calls them into the palace, says, hey guys, it's time to settle up. Pay up or go to jail. There's one man who has a debt so unfathomably large. In fact, the way that the text describes it, it takes their highest numerical term they had, and it takes their highest currency, and it puts them together. You owe $1 gazillion. It would have taken 10, 20 lifetimes to pay it off. The king says, this is how much you owe me, pay up or go to jail. The man weeps and begs. And the king has compassion. And just a stroke of absolutely amazing mercy and grace, he says, you're free. You're free of your debts. I'm canceling them all. And the man goes out. He goes about the streets, and he runs into some people that owed him money. And he says, pay up or go to jail. Pay up or go to jail. He goes around doing this, and sooner or later word gets back to the king that there's a servant who had his debts forgiven, who's demanding other people pay up. And so the king pulls him in. He says, look, if you're going to make others pay, then you can go to jail until you pay it off. What is Jesus teaching us? He's teaching that it is an evil disposition of the heart to enjoy the freedom of debts while demanding others pay up. It is an evil disposition of the heart to enjoy the freedom of debts while demanding others pay up. This story could have been so incredibly different. King settles his account, and the man just so moved by it. Goes about the streets looking for people who owed him. Hey, you owe me money? Guess what? I met a king who just forgave 10 gazillion bucks. Man, you don't owe me a dime. Story could have been so different. Last week we talked about what kind of stories you're going to tell in life. Look, you get to the end of your life. What are you going to tell? What are you going to tell your kids? Now, I held grudges for years. The king let go of my accounts, but I held grudges for years. Are you going to say, you know what? People wronged me again and again and again, just like I did to Jesus, only never anywhere near as much. And I, by his grace, forgave him every time. What story do you want to tell? Which of those two people do you think is going to have people around them at the end of their life who want to be there? Which of those two people is going to have people around them at the end of their years that'll feel safe around them? I mean, don't you want people to feel safe around you? To feel like they can share anything with you at any moment? We don't get there through grudges. We get there through grace, through mercy. Here's the thing. If our debt was canceled, we become debt cancelers. Peter says, Jesus, 7 times? Jesus says, no. Extravagant. Because you've got a source. And your source is endless mercy, so you can have extravagant mercy. And so he's created the room in our bank account for us to continue to pay off unforgiveness, issue after issue through forgiveness again and again and again. So we kind of bring it all back together then. We want to rewrite our tendencies. The part of you that wants to punish somebody else when they let you down should be the part of you that's excited to pay off their debt and let it go. Because that's exactly who Christ was. And this, by the way, this is how it makes you confident. This is how it allows you to become a confident person in an anxious world. Because you've steadfastly set on the fact that I might get tossed out the boat, but that's all right. I've got a God who's in control of it. I've got a God who loves me and has forgiven me of my debt, and I'm ready to hop back in and say, hey man, no big deal. You smacked me upside the head with a paddle. I still love you. It's good. Because we can move throughout life without having to worry about how things will break down. You know what Jesus essentially says in Matthew 6? Let worry about itself. Let worry about itself. Tomorrow has its own trouble. I mean, just let worry about it. You can't control how other people respond, but you can control your response. And how loving and how genuine and how transparent and how kind and compassionate you are to them. That's what we can control. So we can be okay with being let down because God will never let us down. And he's taught us how to love people who let us down. Throughout the series, one of the things that I hope to do is to be able to replace we'll call them broken cycles with effective solutions. Broken cycles are maybe that pattern of how you just continue to do things, how you continue to act within the relationships. So if somebody angers you, you either shut down or shut them up. Like, I'm gonna give you the cold shoulder. I'm gonna back away. I'm gonna punish you with an emotional distance, or I'm gonna go tell somebody else about what you did. I'm gonna get you back that way. These are broken cycles. Ask yourself, how do they work in your relationships? Do they make your life better, or do they complicate things? At the end of your life, will you look back and say, I'm really glad I gossiped about everybody who ever hurt me? Or will you say, you know what? Wow, I let go of a lot. And God was there for me every time. So we're going to give you different cycles or different solutions to the cycles throughout this series. In fact, in 2 weeks, we're going to put out a podcast that's going to have 5 of them. So if you're not getting the podcast, you should get the podcast because a lot of times I look at the clock and I'm like, wow, we only got like this many minutes left and I want to eat lunch. So we'll just put it in the podcast. So you should get the podcast, right? Or buy me lunch and then we could talk about it. Here's a solution to a cycle. Consider trust as an opportunity to love instead of an opportunity to get burned. Consider trust as an opportunity to love instead of an opportunity to get burned. I was thinking about this. I love to let people borrow stuff now. And there's a good chance that they're going to return it and it's not going to be in the same condition. I'm okay with that. Because the condition of how much I love them is way more important than the condition of the object I let them borrow. Like, hey, and seriously, any of you guys need a fishing rod? I've got plenty. Let me know. I don't even care if it breaks because you are more important than the rod. Because loving you is an opportunity to love you instead of an opportunity to get bored. Which is where Jesus, in the beginning of Matthew 6, he asked something that I just think is so amazingly profound. He talks about, hey, don't worry about your food, your drink, your clothes. Isn't life more than these things? Isn't it more? Isn't it more than stuff? Isn't it more than grudges? Isn't it more than the potential for you to be hurt? Isn't it more than that? Isn't it more than being concerned with what may or may not happen? Isn't life more than just protecting ourselves? Isn't it really about loving God and loving people? And isn't that what really satisfies us in life? Isn't that what really is full life that Jesus talks about? Isn't life so much more than worry? People are going to let you down. I promise you that. You're able to love them anyway. I'm going to get you, this is like practice right here. I'm going to let you down right now. There's free steak in the lobby after church. Okay? There's not really. I'm sorry. I just let you down. I'll do it again. The Phillies made the playoffs. There you go. Yeah. The Colts are a good football team. The Mets are great too. See, you're just let down all over the place. I love you, okay? I was prepared to love you. I hope you're prepared to love me too, right? That's how this works. People are going to let you down, and the key is not whether or not you're going to be let down. The key is how do you respond, and you're going to get burned. How do you respond? What's the insulation that keeps it from getting to you and really, really hurting you? And to me, I'm reminded of a story when I was in 7th grade. We had a foods class, and 7th grade, we were learning how to make toast in an oven. Now, I don't know what kind of messed up teacher was having us make toast in an oven when you could put it in a toaster. But anyway, we had the broiler rolling, and I remember very vividly it was my job to get the toast out of the oven, so I put the oven mitt on, and I reach in thinking, this is really dumb, this is really simple to just make toast, and I pull my oven mitt out, and it had touched the broiler, and it was on fire. And I remember looking at it, and I thought, hey guys, check it out, my hand's on fire. Like all the kids are like happy, and the teacher's flipping out, looking for a fire extinguisher. Like you just put it under water, but that's another story. So like it was the craziest thing to be looking at my hand on fire and be like, I just don't even feel that. Now, yeah, eventually I would have. Don't go try that at home. But I remember looking at it thinking like, it doesn't hurt. You can be a confident person in an anxious world because God's love is able to insulate you no matter who burns you. His love is able to sustain you. Now, it will not always be easy. I'm not saying that. This is a path. This is a journey. But I hope that over the years, us as a church and you as individuals become confident people in an anxious world because at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. Our commitment to love should be greater than our commitment to self-preservation. Our commitment to love should be greater than our commitment to self-preservation. If you really want to love God and you really want to love people, you can't keep loving yourself all the time at the cost of loving others. Let's pray. God, I love you. And Lord, none of us likes to talk about having our trust broken. It makes us feel weak. It makes us feel foolish. It makes us feel lonely. We'll do just about anything we can to avoid it. But God, I'm certain that often you allow us to experience these things so we see just how little we trust you. I pray that we would begin to see more and more how much mercy, how much forgiveness we've received from you, that we could be extravagantly merciful to people when they let us down. You are amazing and incredible. We love you. In your Son's name, amen.